What is a dark and disturbing fact you know? Story 1. I recently read the 9/11 Commission report for the first time. One of the saddest things I learned was that the first firefighter death occurred because someone who had jumped from the tower landed on him, killing them both. I saw a documentary where they interviewed this guy's wife. She was surprisingly accepting of it, saying that he was hit whilst lining up to enter the tower and most likely would have died anyway. I was on the 39th floor of One World Trade Center when the first plane hit. It took me 45 minutes to get to the lobby by stairs. There was a PA officer yelling at people not to look outside. I looked outside. It was horrific. A row of airplane seats, a jet engine on top of the globe in the middle, a man in a pinstripe business suit with his brains splattered against the window. There was a constant thumping sound. That was the sound of people landing. The saddest thing was I had to travel through Times Square subway station every day after Wall Street opened back up, and there were walls covered with missing people. I recognized the PA officer's picture. Story 2. There is a phenomenon in driving known as the wave of death, where a motorist will wave on another driver, giving them the right of way, only for another car to crash into them and kill them. This happens most often on four-lane roads, when a car is trying to make a left-hand turn. The wave of death can also claim pedestrian victims, who are waved into their unknowing death. Story 3. By the time noticeable symptoms of dementia start to occur, it's usually too late for intervention. The disease actually kicks off much earlier in life, sometimes in your 40s. Your brain just works overtime to compensate until it can no longer keep up the fight. How would you know, and can you prevent it? Lots of studies are showing that sleep apnea is slowly killing your brain from your 30s or 40s onwards until there is too much damage, like the people who snore super hard and have tons of events, where the brain is so starved for oxygen it wakes up the body as a manual override. Everyone should get a sleep study done at 40, in my opinion. Crappy thing is that CPAPs are like $3,000, and if you don't have insurance, that'll cover it. That's too much out of pocket for many. Story 4. Been doing research into Hollywood, movie accidents or deaths. Here's one that disturbed me and made me pretty sad. During the filming of 1919's The Valley of the Giants, main star Wallace Reed sustained a scalping injury when they derailed during a train sequence. Because they wanted to keep filming, the studio essentially force-fed Wallace increasing levels of morphine so he wouldn't feel pain and be able to act. This led to Wallace developing a morphine addiction that stayed with him for nearly 3 years. Despite attempts at rehab, he would remain in this addicted state until he died in 1923. He became the first American actor, celebrity to die due to a drug addiction, from what I've read so far. Could be wrong about this, but too lazy to research further. It's 2 a.m. I'm tired. You can die from high levels of carbon monoxide poisoning without noticing any symptoms. Since the human body has no way of detecting CO levels, you will just suddenly pass out. CO is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. If you are lucky, you might feel a little dizzy or lightheaded right before going out, but you will probably just have seconds to do something about it. This is why a CO detector is extremely important in places where CO is used. Hemoglobin, the protein in your blood that picks up oxygen, binds to carbon monoxide about 240 times more strongly than it binds to oxygen. This effectively reduces the amount of oxygen that reaches bodily tissues, which can lead to oxygen deprivation. Just so I don't spread false information, lower levels of CO poisoning can cause some symptoms like headache, dizziness, weakness, nausea, vomiting, chest pain, and confusion. This makes CO particularly dangerous because it is easy to mistake the symptoms for other illnesses. Story 6. Just a reminder that the Japanese during World War II conducted horrifying human trials of various grotesque scales, from chemical weapons testing, vivisections, and viral injections. An estimated 200K to 300K people were assassinated via these experiments, and outside biological weapons testing, including children and pregnant women. Scientists involved were on some occasions pardoned, and the United States confiscated all of the findings from the experiments. No one escaped or lived through the experiments. I'm not going to go into detail about the worst of it. You can look it up yourself. Unit 731. Story 7. We don't just say spay your pets to prevent overpopulation. Female dogs and cats develop something called a pyometra, forgive my spelling, or an infection of their uterus. It usually drains, but if it doesn't, it can weigh almost as much as the animal. I've seen 30 pounds from a 45-pound dog. The condition is deadly, and if an owner gets their pet to the vet, sometimes as hard as we try, we can't save them. I saw some horrifying things as a vet tech, but POs keep me up at night, and owners who refuse to spay anger me. Story 8. Rabbits will eat their children if they are stressed enough. Rabbits are usually very quiet creatures, but they are capable of making a scream-like noise. As a kid, my brother and I had rabbits. We thought we had two girl rabbits and that they were too young to breed. We were wrong. My dad woke up to rabbit screams one morning and found the larger rabbit carefully guarding a litter of kittens in a nest of her own fur, fighting off the male rabbit who wanted to eat the babies. She was a good mama. Story 9. When a female mantis bites the head off a male who is breeding them, it is actually a good thing. Males can't start fertilizing until a nerve in their head says they are properly clasped. Think performance anxiety can take hours. When the male has his head bitten off, though, it ain't over. They have an organ in their abdomen that controls copulation. For when their head is bitten off, and it just goes to town, no worries about that nerve waiting for the proper clasp anymore, since it's now gone. So in the end, the females end up getting bred better by a zombie male with no inhibitions. I find this evolution in mantises disturbing as a male and amazing. Story 10. A dominant stallion. Zebra will kill the offspring of other stallions, but mares won't put up with much. When it comes to their sons, a stallion would most likely kick them out. The bachelor stallion, if he's lucky to survive, would join herds of other bachelors until he can challenge the dominant stallion in a harem or start their own. The latter involves kidnapping a mare from another harem. Yet, a stallion may not be pleased with a mare if she's already pregnant and does what he can to cause an abortion. After that, he tries to get the mare pregnant. There's a sane reason for this, has to do with preventing inbreeding. Story 11. A lot of unethical shipping companies, even today, dump a lot of garbage, oily sludge, waste contaminated water and oil out when sailing in international waters far away from the shore. There are only a few handful players today who are actually executing business trades while still keeping the carbon footprint and environment as one of their core policies. I'm glad to be working with one of them. I am a merchant marine who works as an engineer on mega container ships like this. Story 12. You can be in good health, both mentally and physically, one day and then drop dead from an undiagnosed brain aneurysm the next. Most of the time, there are no symptoms leading up to it. It can happen to anyone at any time. The good news, however, is that it's certain death. You won't know what hit you. If you're unlucky enough to survive one, it has permanent neurological effects that can make you a vegetable for the rest of your life. Another tidbit of information to add is that 1 in 50 people you encounter on the street, at work, or school are currently walking around with an unruptured brain aneurysm. Story 13. Project MK Ultra. After the Cold War, the US government was convinced that the Koreans were brainwashing American prisoners. Their solution? MK Ultra, a project in which they would take people from the general public or people from the military and test things such as high doses of LSD, electroshock therapy, and more. The project had some basis, ethical issues aside. You can recreate and introduce false memories, rather easily actually, as you already do so to yourself all the time, and you can make people repress memories. People willfully can decide to not remember something of which you can possibly induce, as well as personalization disorder, and PTSD can contribute to memory loss and brain trauma. But there is somewhat controversial as traumatic events can cause repressed memories. The logic of MK Ultra being if I can erase and replace new memories of a subject, can I use that for manipulation and control towards some objective, whatever that may be that the CIA had in mind? Story 14. The world is heading for a climate-based catastrophe. This won't affect the planet, won't end life on Earth, and likely won't be the end of humanity, but it will irreversibly change society as we know it for the worse. We've known about it for decades, and everything is being done to prevent action. It is too late to avoid it. Decisions have been made based on personal profit that will rob you of the future you've been promised. That has been deemed unimportant to the people who had enough influence to prevent this. Story 15. The American government is corrupt and has been since the beginning of the two-party system. All media platforms, including Fox News and CNN, are both biased and told what to say. It's a cliché mind control game to keep us all divided, and we're currently screwed. Americans need to unite and throw this government system in the trash where it belongs before it becomes the bloodiest civil war/revolution. Story 16. The Challenger disaster was an outcome that was calculated by the NASA launch team. They noticed there could be a problem with the shuttle due to cold weather, but they launched it anyway. Another fact, the person who played the Big Bird Owl on Sesame Street was almost launched on the Challenger shuttle, but the suit was just too big to fit. So Big Bird came damn near close to dying by a shuttle disaster. Rest in peace. Krista McAuliffe and astronauts Gregory Jarvis, Judith Resnick, Mission Commander Scobie, astronaut Ronald McNair, pilot Mike Smith, and astronaut Ellison Onizuka. Story 17. Do you know about the worm that invades ants and makes them end themselves? They were sort of the inspiration for the Last of Us virus. It also infects deer and has been known to infect a moose. The horrible part is that only the final stages are noticeable. So, if you are not careful, you could eat an infected deer. It also travels through excrement and urine, so you could step on it and not notice. Supposedly, there are no human cases, likely story. But the worm is evolving, and if it evolves to humans, we are screwed. Story 18. Cockroaches can survive without a head. Brain-eating amoebas exist in untreated lakes and ponds. Maggots can live inside you. There is a type of louse that eats the tongue of a fish. You can survive being skinned alive. Giant spiders existed 300 million years ago. 2 raccoons could fit in your rectum. Human meat tastes like pork. You will stay alive for about 5 seconds after being decapitated. There is a disease that causes your tissue to turn to bone. Moray eels have a second set of jaws in their throat, and turkeys are cannibals. Story 19. I don't know if this is a fact per se, as it is something I've observed anecdotally through life experiences, but it's that your degree of physical fitness has a very large impact on your social dating life, and by extension, your mental health. It's like night and day. You feel and are stronger, more confident, less anxious, calmer, socially, etc. I went from a nervous wreck who couldn't look people in the eye to a relaxed dude who makes casual conversation with pretty much everyone. It's the magic pill all these self-help gurus have been spouting about for decades. Yet only a minority of the population takes it seriously. Yet dudes are told to just be themselves, and people will love you as you are. It's so crazy to me, and it sounds like some sort of grand conspiracy. People are just told working out is good for you, but are never told why. Story 20. Up in flames. When people get cremated, they are put in an oven that goes up to 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. It leaves a pile of bones, which is ground into ashes, which is what the family keeps. Large magnets pick up any metal fillings in teeth, replacement hips, etc. There are companies that specialize in recycling replacement hips. Some states made laws to prevent crematoriums from making a profit off of the metal and make them donate it to a charity. Story 21. Antibiotic-resistant bacterial infections have become such a large threat that the doctors fighting these infections and the researchers trying to formulate new antibiotics to combat them believe that the return to the pre-antibiotic era is inevitable. They have had to resort to sulfa drugs, which we haven't used since World War II. I almost died from an antibiotic-resistant bacterial strain of C. diff. Doctors were dumbfounded. I'd even caught it because usually it's a hospital-transmitted infection, and it was circulating in the general population. That scared them. It took 5 rounds of antibiotics until one finally took to kill the infection. I was hospitalized on IV antibiotics, and in just the first week of fighting the infection, I lost 15 pounds. I only weighed 108 pounds when I got sick, and I was only 20 years old. I've never seen a doctor scared before, and mine was scared. I asked him if I might die if the antibiotics wouldn't work, and he said yes. People are scared of nukes, Trump, whatever it may be, but what scares me the most? The thing you suspect the least. Bacterial infections, and our ever-increasing inability to treat them. Want a good scare? Google it. Story 22. In toddlers, their adult teeth are right underneath their eyes. Encephalitis lethargica, aka sleepy sickness, is a disease where the patient is conscious and aware, but not awake. They're motionless, emotionless, speechless, and lack an overall connection to life. On average, over 2,000 children go missing every day in the United States. Organophosphates, like sarin gas, work by inhibiting your muscles' ability to relax. So, your muscles constrict but are unable to release, causing every single part of your body to cramp until you asphyxiate. Vitamin D deficiencies can cause suicidal thoughts. It's easier than you think to create false memories. In the 1800s, dentures used to be made from the teeth of dead soldiers. Story 23. The current scientific consensus is that it is impossible to cure a psychopath. Because of this, psychologists direct their efforts to figuring out how to detect them before they can do damage. Problem is, You can't arrest someone for a crime they haven't yet committed. This means that there are thousands, if not millions, of people in everyday society on the verge of committing unspeakable atrocities. And the only current viable solution is to sit around and wait for them to murder someone so we can deal with them accordingly after the fact. Story 24: Rat lung disease. It's causing a little havoc in Hawaii now after making its way from SE Asia. It's a parasite of snails that lives on anything green and has a drastic effect on people. Symptoms don't appear for months and include schizophrenic episodes, comas, hypersensitivity to anything touching your skin. Treatment might involve years of painkiller meds just to get out of bed. Several people have ended their lives because of nerve pain. From Hawaii Journal of Medicine, a 23-year-old man living on the island of Hawaii developed a life-threatening case of eosinophilic meningitis caused by infection with rat lungworm disease. He was comatose for 3 months, incurring brain and nerve damage sufficiently extensive that he was not expected to recover. The case was complicated by secondary infections of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, Clostridium difficile, and pneumonia, which resulted in an empyema requiring a thoracoscopy and decortication. Currently in Hawaii, but working its way east. Wash your veggies, kids. Story 25. Tens of thousands of men died at the Battle of Waterloo, yet no mass graves have been found. Very few human remains at all have been found. First, their teeth were collected by people raiding the freshly dead for valuables. Waterloo teeth were considered some of the finest dentures materials. Many came from upper-class men with better dental hygiene than the previous frequent source of false teeth, desperately poor people who sold their teeth while they were still alive. Later, bones were ground and sold as fertilizer across Europe or used in the process of making refined sugar. If this seems not disturbing enough because it is 200-year-old history, bone char is still used in the process of making white sugar from some manufacturers' animal bone. They ran out of Waterloo skeleton. Story 26. Ladies, keep your asses covered if you become disabled and aren't single. Studies have shown that 70% of the time, male partners abandon a woman who's become disabled. My ex left when my spinal cord injury happened. I'd like to point out how disturbingly easy it can be to get pregnant sometimes, in case anyone's in a bad spot and needs any ideas. I was avoiding it from the same ex who was trying to trap me before my disability happened. If your cycles are regular enough, please remember, you can get pregnant from up to 7 days before and after ovulating. Spermicide film exists. You put it up inside yourself against your cervix and give it about 30 minutes to melt. If a man has ejaculated any time in the past several hours, you can get pregnant from pre. If Plan B doesn't work for people who weigh over 185 pounds, then my ex is, hopefully, infertile like he deserves, because I was 220 taking the Equati brand generic Plan B from Walmart, 10 minutes after he would forget to be careful. Y'all be careful out there. Story 27. We are past the point in civilization of regressing. There is no sense in prepping for Walking Dead scenarios or some crap like that. If a virus or something wipes out the people that can take care of the nuclear reactors, they eventually melt down and make the Earth uninhabitable. Modern reactors have fail-safes that drop all fuel rods and render the reactor inert. Assuming the facility hasn't been damaged to the point where the fail-safe can't engage, the reactor will shut down on its own. It takes a lot of time and human intervention to get them running again. You definitely wouldn't want to get near a derelict reactor, because radiation will eventually begin escaping as the facility falls apart. But most of them wouldn't ever experience a meltdown. Just stay a few miles away from the old power plant, and you're fine. As for older plants that never got safety upgrades after the Chernobyl disaster, that's a different story. Story 28. False vacuum theory. The idea that the universe exists in a state of false vacuum and isn't actually stable. At any time, for any reason, it may fall in its true stable state, creating an ever-expanding bubble of destruction, traveling at the speed of light. We'd have no idea that it's coming towards us, and it would obliterate the universe as we know it in an instant, changing the very laws of physics as we know them. Basically, you might be 1 second away from instant death, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sleep tight. Story 29. Many people have questioned whether or not astrology is real and whether or not it has any basis of proof towards its realness, provable by science, which is odd because science has known of a link between astrology and its realness for the better part of half of a century now. So is astrology real? Yes, but not in the way one may think. What is the scientific proof? The Barnum effect. Unlike many things which drive their realness from tangibility or provable validity, astrology and its realness is derived by taking advantage of a psychological vulnerability which allows the mind to manifest it into something perceived as being real and pertinent with a higher degree of verifiability. Its perceived realness is so effective, it is at the very same cause that limits our ability to disprove it when that is what somebody sets out to do. Free of the manipulation, you know it is not real, but the effect is so strong that once you start to contemplate its realness, a person is usually and inadvertently, simultaneously is making and giving it the very realness they are setting out to prove doesn't exist. The thing that makes this disturbing is how easily our minds can be fooled simply by our own will to allow it to be. This is dangerous because it has allowed that vulnerability to be exploited, and because it is not a detectable exploit. It is happening to us at this very moment, with information being fed to us on a variety of things, and we are happily unaware it is happening. Story 30. The United States is manipulating the value of their currency by forcing oil exporters to trade in US dollar, but accuses other countries of manipulating their own currencies. When an oil exporting country decides not to trade their oil in US dollars, they get invaded and disrupt the stability in that country. Examples are Iraq and Libya. US politicians and military members are war criminals, but no one has the power to bring them to justice. I hope one day Europe can reach military and economic parity with the US so they can force these war criminals to be tried in The Hague. Story 31. That the chance of humanity's extinction in your lifetime over the last 40 years went from 0.58% to 38%. The original in the 80s was an estimate of extinction from nuclear war at 0.58%. That's pretty good, no? Even in a nuclear war with nuclear winter, plenty would survive to rebuild society. So how did it get to 38%? Global warming. And not just the warmth, but all the knockdown effects that will put warming solidly in the 8 degree range, which will make agriculture at any sort of scale needed for more than a few hundred million virtually impossible. And most agriculture between the Arctic and Antarctic circles being very, very difficult in the first place for even tiny communities. The takeaway? With the effective loss of almost all harvestable ocean life, about 98% of arable land, and 80% of livable land, humanity is setting itself up for a population crash that brings us to numbers that would be survivable in a normal world, but not in a world which is significantly harsher than the one we know now. Keep in mind, in statistics, 38% is a really huge probability that something will occur, and an almost inevitability that things will get very, very close. A complete collapse of civilization at the very least. And this estimate is a moving target that is steadily trending worse all the time. No, climate change is not getting better. No, planting trees will not help, unless we dramatically change our entire economic framework to get completely off of oil in just a few years. We are thoroughly screwed. But the parasite class finds business as usual to be far too profitable to allow anything to change.